So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Skill Builder webinar, Navigating the New World of Project Management with Agility. I'm Allison Gonzalez with Essential Assets Group, and I'll be your host today. I'm honored to welcome two subject matter experts who will talk about traditional project management and also about the importance of having an open mindset for success in the new world. Join me in welcoming Mark Tolbert and Susan Parente. They are both well known throughout the project management and Agile community for their expertise and contributions to the industry. They are educators, coaches, and consultants who want to help project managers navigate the new world that's presented to us each day. And as you know, Mark and Susan are co-authors of the soon-to-be published Hybrid Project Management Using Agile with Traditional PM Methodologies to Succeed on Modern Projects. Again, welcome to today's webinar. Let's begin with each speaker just introducing yourselves and answering a quick question. I got a different one for each of you today. Mark, can you briefly introduce yourself and also tell us more about where the vision for your book came from and when you first considered writing it?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Allison, for putting this all together. This is a great opportunity for me and also Susan, and we really welcome this chance. So for background for the book, kind of inspiration for the book, I've been involved with the PMI Washington, D.C. chapter, since 1996, so almost 25 years now. And I've been on the board for a good part of those 25 years. I've done a lot of presentations for the chapter. I've done several dinner meeting presentations, a number of luncheon meeting presentations, and other chapters too. So the Montgomery chapter, the Silver Spring chapter, and businesses like the Census Bureau, Red Cross. And so I'm a key topic, a key area of interest for me for more than 7-8 years has been Agile and how Agile really helps us solve a lot of key problems, key risks. So I've done a number of presentations on that for the chapter. Also, hybrid has been of high interest for me. Also, a lot of my project management friends in the chapter would say, well, yeah, we're doing Agile. Probably over 70% of the project managers in the DC chapter are working on IT projects. And for PMI's own statistics, they would say 90% of people doing IT projects are using some form of Agile. And my friends in the chapter definitely back that up. But most of them come back and say, we are really using hybrid. We're using kind of a hybrid approach. So people are attempting it, and that was always a key area. So a number of these presentations, like can Agile work with earned value? How do we use Agile with fixed price contracts? What are key risks that Agile really helps us with? So this book that we put together is the culmination, it's the compilation of a lot of these presentations. And of course, in these 25 years that I've been involved with the chapter, I've been to many, many dinner meetings. I've heard some awesome presentations. So I'm pulling from a lot of those other presentations, key ideas, key things that really struck me, and then kind of maybe reformulated it. How does Agile help with that particular problem the author was describing? So that's kind of the background. I think the book is an integration of, again, thoughts over these 25 years from being involved in the chapter, from teaching PMP prep classes, Agile classes, and other things. That's it.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Susan, please briefly introduce yourself and then share your perspective in co-authoring this book. I know as someone who I believe has more than 10, maybe you just corrected me, 15 project management and Agile industry certifications. Why do you think the book is different than other books about Agile project management?
Yes, so my name is Susan Parente, and some people may know me also from some PMI conferences. I've spoken in the DC area. I've also been a board member in the Connecticut chapter, which is the Southern New England chapter of PMI. And I'm also a university professor at Post University, University of Virginia, and Montclair State University. And I have a student or two on the call, which is great. So first of all, yes, I have a whole bunch of certifications. So what I was saying to Allison before is that many of these I've obtained because my customer wanted that certification. And in some cases, I obtained certifications because I was trying to figure out what's the best certification for Agile for me to get. And I couldn't decide. So I said, you know what? I'm going to get all of them and then I'm going to know what the difference is. So I now can answer that question if anyone has it. So what's the difference with this book is we're addressing something that other people haven't. A lot of the people who I call Scrum fundamentalists, who are sort of fundamental Scrum people who say, we have Scrum, let's get rid of the old, get rid of traditional, and you can only do Scrum this way, and if you do it any other way, then it doesn't work. Mark and I talk a lot. We've known each other for a number of years. We actually both were at Census Bureau at the same time, but we didn't meet there. We met afterwards through a person we knew together and a client of ours. And one of the things that came up a lot in conversation for us is how do we implement Scrum and or Agile in general in these organizations that are traditional, and what makes sense and what doesn't. And so we're not inclined to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, the heck with traditional, we don't need that anymore. And so we were kind of like-minded about this, having some conversations. Mark, as he said, had done some presentations. I know clients of mine, federal clients and other clients, who said, we want to do Agile, but we still need to keep some of this traditional. And so how this book is different is that it really addresses that. And I think that's what makes it so innovative, is that we're not just saying, get rid of the old, out with the old, into the new. We're saying, how do you integrate this so that you can use Agile as another tool in your toolbox? And how can you have this hybrid concept of using traditional and Agile without doing it in a, jerry-rigged kind of way, like tape and, whatever, Band-Aids. So we wanted to do it in an organized way, and a way that's effective and valuable for the organization. And that's what I love about this book, is because it's very practical in applying Agile practices in traditional organizations and figuring out how they can live together symbiotically and add value to the customer, which is ultimately what we want to do in Agile.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it very much for the introductions and for the context for today's event. Again, welcome. Let's get started.
So here's a subset of the book. Here's some of the key topics that we're going to try to address in our webinar today. So I'm going to hit why traditional project management is still relevant, that Agile hasn't displaced or replaced traditional project management. There still is a need. Just briefly as a preview, Susan's going to get into this more. Probably most of the projects you all are working on, we all work on, are large, complex projects. And in that world, some of the pieces of those projects are quote unquote cookie cutter. They're things you've done many, many times before, hundreds of times before. And when you're in that mode, you've got excellent estimates of time and cost for those sub-projects, for those work packages. So keep things simple. You've also got very good project documents and templates, a scope statement, an SOW, a risk register, a risk breakdown structure. So use those things. So it makes a lot of sense. It's going to be less expensive. It's going to be more efficient to go after those sub-projects as work packages with the traditional tried and true approach. But for other pieces of the project that demand a lot of creativity, where you need to explore and discover requirements, there's a lot more change. There's going to be a lot more volatility involved in handling those pieces. Then, of course, you're going to want to use Agile. So we'll talk about that. We talk in the book extensively about how Agile helps us with 4 or 5 critical risks, key risks that hit us on projects. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the number one risk that we're always dealing with on projects and what's the traditional approach for that. And then Susan's going to pick up and build on that and talk about how Agile helps go farther and solve that key number one risk. And that, of course, that dovetails into other key ways that Agile helps us. And Susan's also going to carry over the topic into how do we really use hybrid. It gets tricky when we do try to use, there's not too much controversy about using different Agile methodologies together. So use Scrum, use Kanban, use Lean, use Extreme. So a lot of people are trying to do that. What's controversial is where you try to mix in the waterfall pieces. And so a lot of people don't agree with that. And so we're going to address that. Susan's going to address that point. Okay, so kind of with traditional project management, what are the roots of modern project management? Where does it all start? When does it start? What industry does it arise out of? And of course, that's construction and engineering. And it really gets started, the modern project management really gets started, I think, in the 1960s in DoD with earned value. You've got DuPont creating critical path method. We start teaching project management classes in colleges about that time. And 2 of the key writers of college textbooks on project management are Harold Kersner and Cleland and King, and they published their books about that time. These guys are engineering professors in Midwest universities. So in construction engineering, what is the life cycle model that is predominant? And of course, that's Waterfall. Do predictive planning, figure everything out in depth up front, dot all the I's, cross all the T's. Do that in various planning stages or planning phases before you start construction. Why? Well, if you have a mistake in your plans, if there's a mistake in the blueprints, you left something out. You left out some key requirements, or you didn't understand the requirement correctly. If there's a mistake in those blueprints, the project management plan, the early plans we're dealing with, and you start construction, you start building your highway, building your building, doing the house remodeling, and you don't discover that mistake for a week or 2 weeks, oops, now you're going to have to tear up and redo a lot of that construction work that was done, and that's prohibitively expensive. Somebody's going to lose their job, right? So it pays to figure everything out, again, in depth up front. And again, this aligns with earned value. Deal with a defined scope type of project. So that's predictive planning. And that really does help us address our key risk, our number one risk on projects. So what is that? What's the number one risk on projects? And it's not doing scope well, which leads to scope creep, something we all hate as project managers, right? Uncontrolled change to the project, not accounting for expansion in the schedule and in resources and in scope. And if you do that, you're going to have schedule delays, you're going to have cost overruns, you're going to have all sorts of customer unhappiness, yes? And probably a new project manager. So figure all that out well. And what's the principal cause of scope creep? Again, not doing scope well, and that starts with not doing requirements well. So missing some requirements, misunderstanding those requirements, not understanding the complexity that's involved, flat out missing some key stakeholders, not getting their requirements. That's death, right? That's definitely a huge problem. So what do? We get very creative. In the PMBOK guide and collect requirements, they urge us to be very, very creative, to err on the side of inclusiveness, do brainstorming, do prototyping, do JAD sessions, joint application design, do QFD, and err on the side of inclusiveness. Don't miss anybody, capture all these requirements. So this is what I did as a systems analyst way back in the late 70s and early 80s. What's so typical of systems analysts, technical people? We assume that we know what the customer wants, and they want something that's state of the art. This is state of the art. They didn't really ask for it, but I know they really want it, so I'm going to include it too. What am I not so good at? Listening. So, Mark, get out of your office, go meet with the stakeholders, truly listen to them, have productive conversations, understand what it is they're really asking for. And so we create these exhaustive requirements documentation where we really capture everything. So I could do that. I could do that very, very well with the team. We could capture all these requirements, err on the side of inclusiveness and capture everything, and we could still fail. And why is that? Because are these stakeholders all together, are what they are wanting in the project, is that all consistent? Are they all on the same page? No, of course not. They're all over the map. People have different needs, different wants. A lot of divergent requirements are coming from these different stakeholders. This is the hard part of project management. Somehow, some way, we have to get them onto the same page. This is what's happening as in the PMBOK guide when we're moving from collect requirements into the key process define scope. This is what's happening. We need to define boundaries. We need to define exclusions as we create the scope statement. We need to get everybody onto the same page. Again, I've been involved in the DC chapter for almost 25 years, been to a huge number of dinner meetings, heard some amazing presentations on projects and things where sometimes they went dreadfully wrong. F-22 program, the Affordable Care Act website program. And what went wrong? The problem was they did not succeed in getting everybody onto the same page. This is tough. Project management is flat out a difficult job. I say this is not for sissies, because no matter how powerful we are, we could be that very empowered project manager in strong matrix, the default we're assuming for the PMP exam. We could be that highly empowered project manager, but guess what? Many of our stakeholders outrank us, our sponsor, the customer, other senior managers, regulatory agencies. They outrank us, and somehow, some way, we have to get everybody onto the same page, and this is tough. So PMI does not put any priorities on the different knowledge areas or processes in the different knowledge areas. So I'm going to go out on a limb and do that. And I say there are 3 key knowledge areas and processes and knowledge areas that are most important. And it really starts with doing a great job getting requirements, all those things I talked about earlier, listening well, not missing any requirements, not misunderstanding complexity. And that's going to be evident in the charter as well as the scope statement when we roll everything up. And that involves doing communications well. This is all really about people skills and soft skills. It's not about technical stuff. It's not how well I can do Microsoft Project or use Primavera. It's not about how well I know the arcane tools of quantitative risk analysis like Monte Carlo or expected monetary value. No, it's all about people skills, soft skills. And what's the essence of that? Good communications. And that's the key skill set for project managers, right? And what's the essence of good communications? That I said a lot of technical people like me have a problem with. What is that? and that's listening. But that's not enough to do that very well. Again, we've got to get these people onto the same page. We've got to define those boundaries and exclusions, and that's going to involve a lot of good stakeholder management. So we're going to have to work with our sponsor, work with senior managers to get the convergence, to get everybody onto the same page. So I think those are the 3 key knowledge areas and processes and knowledge areas. And I could do all that very, very well. I could have this very, very detailed scope statement with very well-written acceptance criteria. Everything nailed down, everything smart. And you know what I mean by smart, right? Specific, measurable, agreed, realistic, time-bound. I could do that all very, very well. And I could still fail. I'm now in the process validate scope where I'm bringing in the customer, the product owner in Agile. I'm bringing them in to get agreement and approval of what we've just created. And there shouldn't be any room for disagreement, right? Because again, we spelled everything out in detail in the scope statement and the acceptance criteria. But I could still fail. And why is that? Why is that? Because in the amount of time it's taken me to create my deliverables, to create what was called for in the scope statement, guess what? The world has changed. We're in this new age. In the past couple of decades, the pace of change has just increased in amazing ways. And Tom Friedman addresses that very, very well in 3 of his more recent books. So it started with The World is Flat. And then he wrote another book, That Used to Be Us, How America Fell Behind in the World It Invented. And his most recent book on this topic is Thank You for Being Late. And he talks about how the world, the pace of change has just increased in amazing ways. It's make dust or eat dust. Or as Jeff Sutherland says, it's change or die. And in the amount of time it's taken us to create our project deliverables, the world has changed, and the customer wants that change. So I think we're now ready for Susan to pick up the baton here and take over. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Do I need to do that?
No, Mark, you can keep sharing.
Okay, that's right. That's right. I forgot.
Definitely, no, it's a great reminder of how relevant traditional project management is for project managers, as well as an important perspective of adapting to the modern world. Susan, I know you have insight here, and you'll take over from here. But Mark, keep control, okay? Thanks.
Okay.
So I like that, Mark. Make dust or eat dust. So I guess we're teaching people today how to make dust. So we definitely don't want to be eating dust. That doesn't sound pleasant at all. So traditional project life cycle structure, we go through these phases or these stages, and the PMBOK guide, we call them the process groups. You know, we have this conceptual design, detailed design, we then do development, we then do unit testing, and then integrated testing. And you can see that this takes a while. So most project life cycles are lengthy, a year or more. I would say the smallest projects that I've been in have been about a year. Mark, you need to share the slides again. Okay, thank you.
Oh.
So during that time, a lot can change. And so I have some examples of this. When I did some work for the DoD, I was working at the Pentagon. We had a very large project that was a package tracking project for everything that came into the Pentagon. The requirements for that, it took us a year to actually gather and document the requirements. Or maybe it's more like 6 to 8 months, but it took a substantial amount of time. And I remember there was I think like a 4-inch binder, one of those 3-ring binders with the requirements. It had all the processes and all the stakeholders involved and everybody's role. And we had that all defined. Then we're about to actually implement the software to manage that. So we were actually taking a paper-based system and doing it in an automated system. And in the amount of time it took to do that, we actually had to go back and redo requirements. Okay, so this lengthy life cycle and this phased development, the way that we do this, it doesn't necessarily work in a lot of situations, especially in IT software development. So next slide, please. So with that, we can see how we would want to use this more modern approach. So where we have an iterative or adaptive approach versus that waterfall or sequential approach that you saw on the last slide. So with an iterative approach, for example, one of my other clients at DoD, we're implementing the Mass Transportation Benefit Program. And what they wanted is they wanted 4-week iterations. They wanted to be able to release something to the customer, have changes within a 4-week time frame. And at first we thought that was kind of short. And I think actually we ended up settling on something like 6 to 8 weeks. But in general, in Agile, it's usually 1 to 4 weeks. And what we're able to do is we're able to look at what changes the customer needed, what they needed right away, and we're able to do some development within that month time frame, and then do testing, and then have something we could deliver to them sort of incrementally, or even in iteration. So the difference between the increment and iteration, an increment is a small piece of sort of the big pie of whatever you're creating, and an iteration, we're actually giving a product and then getting feedback and then using that feedback to then improve things. So we actually incorporated both of those. We also want to use lean concepts, which lean is about reducing waste and increasing value. And part of that is identifying failures fast. That's really important. And one of the things I notice, especially because I focus on risk management and Agile, is that people have this very negative connotation of failure. I see failure as an opportunity for guidance to redirect so that I'm where we want to be, or our team is where we want to be. So we want to fail early as opposed to later. We know that failing later with a product delivery has a higher cost. Failing early, we can actually make adjustments, make changes, and have a better chance of delivering value to the customer, which is ultimately what we want to do in Agile. So next slide. So this is a slide I'd like to use to compare traditional to Agile. So assuming people have some understanding of traditional project management, traditional project management is very plan driven. And what we mean by that is the scope is fixed. So we have a set requirement set or list of requirements at the beginning of the project, and then we develop the scope, which is the work we're going to do to deliver on those requirements. So that's fixed. And then we estimate how long it's going to take, so the time and the cost, how much money it's going to cost. So by doing that, we really need to know upfront everything, which gets us in kind of that mess if things change that Mark was talking about earlier. In Agile, we flip this triangle around. This is our triple constraint triangle. And just as a refresher, what this says is that the triple constraint says we have time, cost, and scope. If one of those things changes, one of the others must. So example, if I take 20% off of a project after the budget's been set, and I say, you know what, we need to do budget reductions, I'm going to take 20% away. Okay, great, then we need to adjust time or scope. Okay, so that I call it gravity for project management, and you don't have to believe in gravity for it to operate that way. Okay, so this is the gravity that we deal with, is that this triple constraint really exists. And it happens. We often see we've estimated time, we've estimated cost, so we have a schedule, we have a budget, and then scope is added. Well, what happens if scope's added? The triple constraint says we need to change the time and the cost, or both. So in Agile, we flip this triangle around and we change how we do things. We fix the time and the cost. So we have those iterations, 1 to 4 weeks. And we fix the cost. We know how many people we have on our team, and we know how long they're working. So we know the cost for the project. We know the time for the project. We know the durations of each iteration or increment, and then we estimate the scope. So that's kind of weird. So by estimating the scope, that allows us to be value driven. So our focus is on what are the things that are going to deliver the most value to the customer, and the priority that we develop and deliver that scope is going to be based on what's most important to our customer. So by flipping that around, we actually get to determine the scope that we want to work on for each iteration. So it doesn't have to be fixed in the beginning. So basically what we're saying is, we know our project's going to get done on time. We know how much it's going to cost. I can't tell you exactly what I'm going to deliver to you, but I will tell you that what I deliver to you will be the most valuable thing that you need for this project. So it's definitely a shift of mindset, a shift of thinking. Okay, so I think I'm passing the baton back to Mark.
Oh, okay. So great. So in this iterative approach where we've got short iterations, 1 to 4 weeks, and we're exploring, we're discovering scope, what's the customer going to give us for requirements? Every time we start a new project, what is the customer going to give you regarding requirements? What does the federal government always do in an RFP? They include everything under the sun. Everything remotely imagined gets included in the requirements, in what the Agilists would call the backlog. And what's the priority of all these requirements? Everything is priority number 1, right? They've got to have everything. So are they going to use everything? Is that true? Are they really going to use everything? Of course not. So there was a Standish survey done some number of years ago where the Standish group came up and said 65% of the requirements the customer thinks they absolutely have to have, 65% will never be used. There's some controversy about how the Standish group came up with that 65% number. So something to me that's more solid is this is another place where Pareto's law applies. So for PMP prep classes, what's Pareto's law? What's the classic use of Pareto's law? 80% of your problems come from 20% of the causes. But in sales, what is Pareto's law? 80% of your orders, 80% of your sales comes from 20% of your customers. In requirements, what is Pareto's law? 80% of the customer's need comes from 20% of the requirements, 20% of the backlog. So in Agile, they're going after that 20% that's going to meet 80% of the need. They're going after that 20% in the first iterations. And they're quickly rolling something out to the customer for review, the product increment, and they're finding out what has value and what doesn't. This is lean. They're finding what has value, what doesn't have value. If it doesn't have value, they remove it from the backlog. They don't invest in it further. They're not going to have to do all the integrated testing. They're not going to have to do all the documentation. So they're going to save time. They're going to save money. So if we do this right, I'm going to tell my sponsor, I'm going to tell my customer, they want a fixed price. Everybody wants a fixed price, and I'm going to be able to give that. I know the price of each iteration may be at $60,000, and I can tell them I'm going to do 10 iterations, so therefore $600,000. And so I'm going to give you a fixed price, I'm going to give you a fixed schedule, but I'm not guaranteeing what I'm going to create in those 10 iterations. That's to be determined. That's to be discovered. But if we use lean the correct way here, then I can guarantee to you we're going to create something of higher value than if we tried to predict everything up front. In our software projects, our knowledge work projects, so much of what's going on today, this is much better, a much better way to do that. So this helps us deal with this cone of uncertainty. Again, in this modern world, in Tom Friedman's age of accelerations, there's so much more uncertainty. At the beginning of the project, we can't really predict how technologies are going to change. What's really going to be the best engineering design? What's going to be the best solution a year from now? 8 iterations from now, 10 iterations, I don't really know. So Agile's helping us discover that and explore that and figure out better as we move from iteration to iteration what works best. For this to work, so this set of tools is not just some nice, neat set of tools for the programmers and the developers and the project team. No, the customer must be much more completely involved and helping. They must be involved in these review meetings. They must be involved in the iterations. The product owner must participate. We need their feedback. But even more importantly, we need them to provide the right culture, the right environment. There's a premium on creativity. So the management team, the customer must provide a lot more freedom and trust. So what we call a theory Y type of environment. And here's some great quotes. So Ken Schwaber says, Agile or Scrum is really about the art of the possible. It is not, you give me what I paid for when you said you would deliver it. So here's a summary, kind of contrasting traditional project management and Agile and Scrum. So when we are in that cookie cutter world, when we've done this type of work over and over and over again, we've got very good estimates of time and cost, then it makes sense. It's going to be simpler. It's going to be more efficient and less expensive to go with the cookie cutter type approach, the predictive planning type approach. But in our modern world, we really need oftentimes to use Agile to discover and explore requirements. Again, that's going to be more expensive, yes, because ideally in Scrum or in Agile, we're going to have a team of 5 to 10 dedicated resources, and who are, by the way, also senior resources, so more expensive on that side of the scale. And also, ideally, they should be co-located. I don't know about you, but that's a big ask. I would have a very tough time going to upper management in my company and asking for that on all of my projects. They're gonna push back. I would be lucky if I could get a couple of dedicated resources to projects, and to have people co-located is even a bigger ask. So I need to be open to mixing in the waterfall approaches in places, and I need to be open to mixing in virtual Agile teams too. So Susan, are you picking up this piece?
Yes, I am. That little piece of the puzzle there, that red one, I'm picking that up.
Okay.
So first I wanted to say about virtual. I actually wrote a section of this book on virtual Agile. I've been doing Agile project management virtually for a number of years, and I'm a huge proponent of virtual work. So you can imagine how excitedly thrilled I am that everybody's working virtually now, especially all of my colleagues who said how horrible that would be and they would never want to work virtually. And now they're like, I hope I never have to go back in the office. I love working virtually. So there are, of course, some challenges, and especially in Agile where there is a preference for co-location. But we do talk about that in this book. And so what this slide talks about is how can we actually mix these traditional with Agile pieces. And I said before, we want to be very intentional about this. We don't want to be sloppy. Somebody once said to me, you don't want this to be the buffet where you get to go and just get the stuff you like, and no veggies, just dessert, whatever, and just do the things you like and don't do the things you don't like. So we're not recommending a hybrid approach that just is the stuff that's yummy and not the stuff that's good for you, because the stuff that's good for you is actually going to produce that product for the customer. So instead, we want to use a value approach. What is going to provide the most value for the customer? And going back to what Mark said before about the Pareto principle and 80-20, one of the things that someone once said to me is we know for traditional projects, especially in IT, that we end up delivering 80% of the scope of what the customer wanted. Well, if we know we're going to deliver 80% of the scope, wouldn't we want to assure that the 80% we deliver is what's most valuable to the customer? And if you believe that statement, then you'll see the value in using Agile, because in traditional project management, we don't design and develop based on priority to the customer or value to the customer. We just attack the whole 100%. And oftentimes, because of scope creep and other problems and risks, etc., we end up delivering 80%. We don't know if the 20% we don't deliver is something that was really important to the customer. And that's why this Agile approach is much better, even though it's not as definitive. Like Mark said, we can't tell you what exactly we're going to, we can't commit to that. And the reason we can't commit to it is because you don't know exactly what you want, speaking to the customer. So how we mix these pieces together is really about, looking at what's most valuable to the customer. Now, if we have a larger project, we want to use a concept called a scrum of scrums, and that is going to actually help us to take a large complex project and have a number of teams work on it together. Now, this is an example of the Scrum method, but you can use something similar if you're not using Scrum. So with this approach, let's say we have some teams that are using traditional project management and we have other teams that are using Scrum. I've actually encountered this when I was at Census Bureau. So we had a major program that I was supporting. I was part of the program office, and we would have a Scrum of Scrums, and we did ours every 40 days. And in that, we would have teams, some of which were traditional and some of which were using Scrum. And we got together and we talked about what the high level requirements for the major, as like a major project level, what were needed. And what's interesting about this, when we do project management like this, we're using the same list called the product backlog, the same list of requirements all of these teams are working on. However, they all work on different things at the same time. And so we need to meet together to decide what we're going to do, and then each team goes off and does that. So this is a way to make it more scalable, and also a way to integrate traditional project management along with using Scrum, because in our organization, if our organization is hybrid, we're going to have some traditional project management teams and we're going to have some Scrum teams. An example of this is that when we do something like an IT type of project or program, where we have a architecture group who's focused on architecture for the system that is going to be used by the other teams to actually do the stuff, do the work that they're doing, do the work product. And so with that, architectural things are probably best done using a traditional method, as we talked about, but that doesn't preclude us having a Scrum team doing software development for the software that's going to ride on that architecture. And so this approach allows us to deliver something that makes sense for the customer. And I think this is my handoff to you, Mark. So if you want to say more about this slide before you move on.
I think you covered all the points about the Scrum of Scrums.
Okay.
I guess one thing I would add here is, and maybe we're getting into the problems area, but we don't want to mix, we don't want to try to do Scrum or Agile within the waterfall pieces. So the pieces that are waterfall, we want to keep independent. Those work packages, those sub-projects, we want to keep them totally independent of the pieces where we are using Scrum. So you don't want to say you're doing hybrid where you're doing Scrum or Agile, but you're having a daily stand-up meeting that's going 45 minutes or 50 minutes. It's a regular weekly status meeting. You don't want to use Scrum, but also have a critical path within that.
Mm-hmm.
So keep things independent as much as possible. So are we doing this slide together, Susan, or how do you want to do this?
This is all you, Mark, and then I'm
This
on
is
the
all
next
me. Okay. So again, kind of summing things up, we're saying Agile is not a replacement for Waterfall. It's not a panacea. It doesn't solve everything. So again, I guess I hit this point right here on the first bullet. So don't say you're doing Agile, but require a lot of traditional components or parts of that Agile thing. Don't have the stand-up meetings be 45-minute meetings. Don't require using Microsoft Project or Primavera with Agile and having a critical path. Other problem areas. So again, the company has to provide the right environment. This is really about culture and management style. You have to provide this theory Y type environment. A lot of freedom and trust needs to be provided. If you're going to emphasize creativity, then that must be done. And that's going to get even harder in the hybrid environment, isn't it? If we have some pieces being done with Waterfall and predictive and some pieces being done with Agile, we need to provide that very enlightened theory Y type environment across the board. You can't really, it wouldn't be fair, it wouldn't be right to provide it differently and inconsistently across the company. So that might be tough for management in the company to buy into that. But I think they need to do that. They have to really successfully do that for this to work. And I think in Silicon Valley, I think in tech, some number of companies are doing that. I think Google, Apple, some companies are providing that type of culture across the board in all areas of the company, even in operations. So I think that can be done. Agilists today, many Agilist authors, writers are quite skeptical about using hybrid if they mean to use Waterfall with Agile together. They would say that if you do that, you're going to end up corrupting Agile. They would say that to try to mix Scrum with Waterfall, it's not going to be Scrum plus Water plus Fall. It's going to be Scrum plus Water plus Fail. And again, we would agree. We would say that if you try to mix within the same components, within the same work packages, Agile, Scrum, and Waterfall, then that's probably not going to be a good thing. You probably are going to fail. But we think it can be done successfully if you keep all those pieces independent. And I think Susan agrees, that this is absolutely necessary today. You just can't, for many of our large complex projects, it's just not, you're never going to be able to sell to upper management to have dedicated teams of 5 to 10 people co-located for everything. That's going to be far too expensive. In my world, that would certainly be the case. So we've got to be more open-minded and give this a try, and we can make this work if we go about it the right way.
And the key thing I wanted to point out here too is, I use the term scrumdimentalist as somebody who just says, it's Scrum or the highway kind of thing. And I think that practically, especially in the federal government, there's a lot of regulatory things that projects have to be under. Any IT project has a congressional mandate for reporting. and that reporting is very much geared towards traditional project management. And so a lot of the artifacts that we use in traditional project management are still going to be necessary. And that's what I've found through the federal government work that I've done. And you can have governance be traditional and still have your project team doing Scrum or some other Agile method. And that's where, figuring out what pieces of this can we use hybrid for and what pieces do we need to use traditional for. I think that's something you should really be intentional about. And like Mark says, you have a complex project, look at the projects from NASA. They can't do all Agile, but could they do one particular part using an Agile method? Sure, they could. But overall, the whole project needs more of a traditional focus because these are very large projects, very complex projects, very expensive projects. So our solution is let's use all of the tools we have instead of being focused on, no, we can only use Scrum or we can only use Agile or we can only use traditional. Why not be better off by using all that we have an option to use? So go ahead, Mark. I just wanted to interject that.
No, that's great. Thanks. So we do think this can work if we keep the different sub-projects or work packages separate from each other. And I hit that point that it's, in my world, it would not be practical. It would not be possible. Management would never allow me to have dedicated teams of 5 to 10 people for all of my projects. So is there one perfect way to do things? No. It's that answer that students in my PMP classes hate. They say, well, what does PMI recommend? What's the right approach for solving this particular type of problem? And my answer always is, it depends. So it depends on the circumstances, what level of creativity is involved. Are we going to need to explore requirements, discover requirements? Are the possible engineering solutions, technical solutions, are those changing very, very rapidly? Is there a lot of volatility? Then we're going to use Agile. But if it's something we've done time and time again, and we, as Susan pointed out a while ago, if the customer knows exactly what they want going into things, if they've got their mind made up and they know what they want, then we can use the traditional predictive approach. If they only know what they want at a high level, so business requirements, functional requirements, and we need to explore the best engineering solution that's going to fit those functional requirements, then we're going to use Agile. But there's no one perfect process or methodology. Questions? Do we have time for questions, Allison?
Sure, we have a couple minutes. So yeah, if you go to that slide, thank you both for sharing your expertise and your perspectives today. We have time for a couple questions. So if you guys have any questions, definitely type in the chat box. And if you haven't already, now's the time to do it. I haven't seen one come up that we haven't answered. We've been answering a couple as they go. But in the meantime, I'll share some information about the speakers as you see on your screen. You can follow and connect both Mark and Susan on LinkedIn.
Nancy Jean Wallace has a question. She says, my project teams are often developing without knowing what the exact outcome is. So we have to start with requirements. The hybrid approach would work better for me. That's great to see, Nancy. Good. Now the thing is, how do you get your stakeholders on board with that? I will tell you, I implemented Agile practices for one of my projects. It was basically a traditional project. We had a Gantt chart. We were doing everything traditionally, but I broke down the development into increments. And so I basically used Agile practices, but I didn't tell my customer I was using Agile. I used a hybrid approach because it made sense because they didn't know entirely what they wanted. They had a general idea, but they were one of these customers that needed to see the product to get a better feeling for what they wanted. So what I did is we broke down the project into pieces or increments, and each one of those we'd show them a prototype, get some more requirements from them, elicit some requirements from them, and then do development. And what we found is we were doing a lot less rework and a lot less change requests. If I asked them today, did we do Agile, they would say no, because they didn't know, because I didn't tell them. So sometimes, not to be secretive, but sometimes the way to implement it is to actually implement it as it works where it's needed. That does not mean you have to, get everybody trained up on Agile, because you're going to get a lot of resistance if you say that. I've done other situations where I implemented a Kanban process, Kanban method, and my team said, I don't know anything about Agile, but we were using Kanban. And then after months of using it, I told them what we were doing, and they were like, oh, I can't do that. I don't know anything about Agile. And I said, well, you've been doing it for the last 2 months. So apparently it works. So sometimes implementing these practices is not as difficult as it may seem to your team members and to your customer. So I'm not saying to be, lie to them or anything, but I'm just saying maybe you don't have to explain everything to them. Just explain that what you're going to do is going to add value for them. And it really shouldn't matter which approach you use. Nancy says, yes, that's great. We tried that with a project last year, but the team was a bit disheartened when we kept getting new requirements and sharing of the iteration. That's a stakeholder management kind of thing, even for your team. I think we often see getting new requirements as being frustrating. We're like, okay, well, didn't I give the customer what they want? So let's think about it as individuals. At Christmas time, you might get some gifts. If you celebrate Christmas or celebrate Hanukkah, you might get some gifts, right? Does that mean that at the end of that time of when you've unwrapped everything, that there's nothing else you want? No. I mean, probably you want batteries, because you get gifts that need batteries, and you're like, I don't have any batteries, right? So it's like by getting things, it actually inspires us to want other things. It's kind of crazy. I don't know if it's an American thing or just a human thing, but I find when I get something, it doesn't stop me from wanting more. If anything, if I get something I like, it makes me want something more, not want something less. And so it's odd. I've been there myself, where my customer asks for something else, and I'm like, well, gosh, this is infuriating. I just gave them something. So the way I look at it is, if I give my customer something and they tell me to leave, they're not happy. Okay. If I give them something and they tell me they want more, they are happy. That's a sign of being happy when we want more. And it's just sort of, we need to change that mindset. And that's why I say it's stakeholder management. It's changing the mindset of your team. If your customer asks for more, it's like asking for seconds when you had dinner. It's a good sign. It's not a bad thing. So maybe just try to get them to shift that way of looking at it. Nancy Jean, thank you for your question.
Well, thank you so much, guys. We're at the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of people's time, but if people still have questions, please feel free to email them to me or reach out to Susan or Mark on LinkedIn. I put the LinkedIn links in the chat box for you. Also, just following up as an attendee of today's event, just 2 things. I'll follow up with access to the archive of this event. It was recorded, and you'll get access to a book summary that we've provided for you. And as a special offer, if you're interested, contact one of our speakers directly, and you can pre-order to purchase a signed copy of their soon-to-be released book. It's a lot of adjectives right there, but that's available to you as well. And then, Mark, if you go to the next slide, I'll just share a little bit of information about Essential Assets Group, and just make sure that you're following us as well too. Connect and follow with me or my company on our company page, and join our community. Subscribe. That's where you'll hear about events like this. other programs that we offer, training programs, blog updates, blog posts, or archived events and information as well. So I know we can hang on for a couple of minutes if people have a couple of questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining today. I truly appreciate it.